Okay, so what have we got planned for today? This is my introduction at the start. What I'll do is I'll just run through things that Compass does, which you're going to get a bit of flavour of with our presentations today. Then I'll pass over to Alice Mills, who's a criminologist at the University of Auckland. She works with Compass, but not for Compass, if that makes sense. And she's working with Cinnamon, who does work for Compass, to talk about a project they're working on, doing some interviews in prison with prisoners who are about to leave, and following them up after prison to see the extent to which housing factors impact their reoffending. Martin, who's popped out for a short time, he's going to talk about data archiving that we've been doing for a number of years, and I think with a focus on the fact that we've kind of been left behind a little bit on that regard. Then I'll give a slightly flip side talk of risks of putting things into data archives in terms of the disclosure risks of data sets. And then we've got a session of two students, Olivia, a former student but working with Compass at the moment, talking about various aspects of socioeconomic status. So they'll run that session, have that session together, have a 10-minute talk each, and then we'll break for questions. Then there'll be a lunch break, which won't be out here as the morning tea was. It'll be through in the lunchroom through there. And then I'll be back up to talk about the work that we're doing, one of our bigger projects on the Better Start National Science Challenge. Stephanie will follow me talking about some work with the Better Start National Science Challenge, looking at trends in ADHD dispensing. And then we'll finish with Lara Greaves. Lara's here, yes, who's going to talk about some work we've done with a survey program we work with called ISSP. And there's a module that we ran last year on religion, and it asks questions about attitudes to religion, religious groups in New Zealand, and that's what Lara's going to talk about. Okay, so just a bit about Compass. Compass has been going for, I think, 12 years now. It used to be the Social Science Research Group, and we became Compass. This is before my time. The original director was Peter Davis, who set it up. I've been director for 2 years now, I think. Nicola's deputy director. She is part-time with Compass at the moment, is working most of her time actually in Wellington at the Social Investment Agency. She'll be here later. Roy Leahy, Senior Research Fellow. Stephanie and Lara as Research Fellows. Lara's now moved on to be a lecturer in politics at the University of Auckland. Cinnamon and Olivia, who you'll hear from later. Martin, who you'll also hear from, is a data analyst. And Kevin, data analyst, is about to finish up and work for NZTA, yes, here in Wellington. And Eileen, another data analyst. And we've got various students, PhD students, Liza and Natalia, master's students. Sean's just finished, it's his work I'm going to present on the disclosure stuff, and Simon Swinton doing some work in the education area. As I'll explain, we do a lot of work with Stats New Zealand data, or Stats New Zealand managed data at least, in the IDI, Integrated Data Infrastructure. We actually just moved offices. We used to have a data lab where we worked at Compass. Now we don't, but we've got one adjacent to us at the Public Policy Institute, which is very handy. Okay, so just running through quickly the sort of things that we do at Compass. One thing that we do that we don't have a presentation on today. In previous colloquia, we've typically presented on this, but we do microsimulation, that's simulating micro-level units through time, creating a virtual world that allows you to sort of run policy scenarios on what would happen if this was the case type of thing. We've had various projects over the years. This work was begun by Peter Davis, doing work in ageing. A couple of projects there funded by the Health Research Council, looking at what happens if you shift care from a formal care model to a sort of social care model. What would be the economic and other impacts of that, and the health impacts of that. Then when I got involved, or just before I got involved, there's a project called Modelling the Early Life course from LC. What we look to do is generate children developing through time, look at their trajectories over time, which we get from analysing the longitudinal studies in New Zealand, and look to see the sort of things that we can make an intervention on and what the impacts of that would be. We extended that with Knowledge Lab of the Early Life course, which I did speak about last year, both of those funded by what is now called MBIE, where we replaced our estimates from longitudinal studies with estimates that we got from the international systematic review literature. And then relatively recently finished as a book that Peter Davis wrote with the help of Martin, who should be here shortly, and Roy, who is a senior research fellow at Compass, using longitudinal census data from Stats New Zealand to run various scenarios on what would happen if the policy things that did happen happened differently, funded by the Royal Society of New Zealand. That was a James Cook Fellowship. The main thing we probably do now, but you'll hear mostly about other things actually today, but the main thing we do now is whole population data analysis. And by that, we're mostly using IDI data, though not exclusively. Project looking at socioeconomic influences on mortality, so socioeconomic influences across the life course on mortality. For that, we're one of the first, and I think only now still, users of the New Zealand longitudinal census, apart from that simulation project I mentioned before. You will hear a bit about the Better Start project that we work on. So we're part of the big data theme with the Better Start group, and work with the other themes on healthy weight, resilient teens, and successful learning and literacy to answer questions that can only be answered with big data. A project that we worked on that's still sort of drifting along a little bit. We're just still doing a little bit of work with this, with the Ministry of Social Development, who have developed a simulation model, actually, of children going through state care and what their outcomes are afterwards. And we developed some, or helped develop some wellbeing domains there, in the process of validating those now. A project we're working on now that Nicola's very heavily involved with, we're not presenting on today, but the influences of child poverty and health, utilising the SOPHI survey and the IDI to get a measure of poverty for children and looking at what health outcomes those children have, again funded by the HRC. Surveys. We for many years have run surveys. The two big ones that we run routinely are the International Social Survey Program, that's the one that Lara is going to talk about later, with the religion survey that was run last year in 2018. The deal with the ISSP is that different countries around the world, currently 45 I think, run the same survey every year on a social science topic. But the survey they run changes from year to year on a roughly 10-year cycle. So that means you can do sort of cross-country comparisons on whatever the thing is, national identity, citizenship, work, role of government, etc. Environment coming up, social qualities this year, environment, and then I think it's health and then gender roles. So you can do comparisons over time, but also comparisons across countries, which is kind of cool. What we also do is run the New Zealand election survey with Jack Vowles and others, where there's a survey that goes out, I think, on the election day, so that it gets to people a few days after the election day to ask about their voting patterns and beliefs and attitudes towards politicians and that sort of thing. And we run various other surveys. We've been wrote a scoping report about an evaluation survey for the Etu Whānau program for MSD. And we do various other surveys on the fly. We've done one on Pacific suicide and various other things. One for Ngāti Whātua, actually, now I think about it too. And then there are things that don't quite fit in those other categories, which I'm labelling as social research. So yeah, that Pacific suicide morbidity and mortality study, for instance, funded by HRC, there was a survey component as part of that. One thing Roy presented on last year was loneliness across the life course. That's funded by Jeanette Crossley Foundation. Jeanette Crossley left money in her will to do research on loneliness and also complex medical conditions, and that's coming to an end now, but we may be extending it to look at some Dunedin study data in relation to MRI screens that they're doing on the Dunedin study. And then we've just finished a scoping study looking at whether it is possible to create a community-level Māori strengths-based index for Māori in New Zealand, and we've written a report on that. And then what Alison Cinnamon is going to present on very shortly is a project funded by the Marsden Fund, as I mentioned before, looking at the impact of stable housing on and reoffending by ex-prisoners. Okay, so that's a quick run through of what we do. That's the schedule for today, as I say. We've got a couple of minutes if people would like to ask. I suppose one thing I should say that I didn't mention there, and you've probably got a a flyer for. We also run courses under the branding of the New Zealand Social Statistics Network, the NZSSN. We run courses in Wellington in November on various social science methodology topics. We also run, as part of that, we run a course on Introduction to the IDI, and also a course on how to use SQL for people who are IDI users or wanting to get into that space, but various other things on mixed methods and qualitative research and survey design and SPSS and an R course as well. So that's the other thing we do as well. So courses in Wellington in November, they're going to be run at Massey University this year, and we run another set of courses in Auckland in February. So that's another thing just to say.